Welcome into Survivor Analytics. I am your host, Clyde, and as with every Survivor season, I will be going through and ranking the entire cast of Season 46. This is my 5th player ranking on this page. So far, I've done 44 through 46, as well as Samoa and China, so I'm almost 1/9 of the way there, I guess. As with my other list, the same rules apply here, where I'll be judging these players solely according to their performances on this season, so if any of them come back in a future season, none of that counts here. I tried to balance all 3 core aspects of the game, those being the physical, social, and strategic, but I generally put more emphasis on the social and strategic elements. With this list, there's a bit of a predictive element to it, where I asked myself the question, if each of these contestants competed in 100 seasons of Survivor, how many do I think they would win? This means that I'm looking for characteristics from these players as they go through the game, rather than solely judging them by the outcome of this season. We can start at the bottom of the list, the number 18 spot, and we have 2 contestants competing for this position. I strongly considered Jelinsky, who was in fact the first boot of the season, but I ultimately landed on the contestant that came to the island to win 1,000,000 hearts rather than $1 million. It's Bhanu. You can totally make the argument that Jelinsky is a worse player than Bhanu, but I think Bhanu lacks that fundamental understanding of the game. Bhanu lacks an ability to tactically lie in the game, which I think is a foundational skill set. In general, Bhanu believes that by being honest with other contestants, he will gain their trust, regardless of the content of that honesty. In episode 2, Bhanu blatantly targets Jess at Tribal Council, which gives her an opportunity to play her shot in the dark. Then in episode 3, he goes on a journey and leaks all of his tribe's information, which is not a bad idea on its own, but he follows that up by telling the Yanu contestants that he spread all of their dynamics. If you're going to credit Bhanu for one thing, it's his ability to not immediately magnify his own target. He's included in the consensus plan to eliminate Jelinsky. He survives the second Yanu Tribal Council where Jess goes home, but he's never fully in the center of that group. By the time Bhanu gets voted out in episode 4, he is so clearly on the bottom of that tribe that they don't even bother holding a vote. Long story short, Bhanu seems like a nice guy, maybe a person that could earn a couple jury votes from that social play if he made it to the final tribal council, but I just have no confidence in his ability to ever reach that point. Then at the number 17 spot, we have a contestant that would probably place last in most other New Era seasons. It's David Jelinsky. Jelinsky's legacy on Survivor is really defined by his quits. He quits the Sweat vs. Savvy challenge in the first episode. He quits the Weird Journey card game against Moriah and Tevin. He even quits his original attempts at deceit. His decision to tell the Yanu players about the events on the journey make it blatantly obvious that Jelinsky is working to make deals with his opponents. With that said, Jelinsky is an iconic first boot. I would not be surprised if we see him return to Survivor at some point down the line, but for right now, he ranks at number 17. Moving ahead to the number 16 spot, we have our 3rd consecutive Yanu member, and it's Jess Chong. Jess's social reservedness really holds her back on this season, and it prevents her from ever fully integrating into the Yanu tribe. In the first tribal council, she's a potential target due to her lack of social relationships combined with her poor performances in the challenges. Then in episode 2, she could not even survive a round where Bhanu essentially blows up his game at Tribal Council. I think if Jess were even an average social player, those connections would have been enough for her to survive that round as Bhanu leaked all of their secrets. On top of all that, Jess was tricked into playing a fake idol, which prevented her from playing her shot in the dark during her elimination round. We learned after the show that Jess understood that the idol could have been fake, but she was just ready to leave the island, which is honestly worse for her assessment. I will cut Jess some slack because I think her tribe was very different from her on a personal level. That Yanu group has so many bold personalities that definitely pop off screen, but I don't see them aligning with a character like Jess. To be honest, I think Jess is a player that would have gone further if she was on either of the other 2 tribes. Granted, I still don't think she wins the game that many times over 100 seasons, which places her here at number 16. Looking over to the number 15 spot, we have our first non-Yanu contestant and a player that I initially expected to rank higher on this list. It's Jem. Jem's run on Survivor 46 is a straight-up roller coaster, and while her high points surpass many of the contestants in this bottom tier, it is those low points that cause her to drop down the list. Let's start with the positives, and this should be obvious. It's the item at the top of Jem's Survivor resume. It's the fact that she found an immunity idol in secret. Even after Jem gets voted out of the game, the remaining SIGA contestants continue to accuse each other of finding that idol. With that said, Jem's gameplay around the idol is definitely questionable. After finding the Beware advantage, Jem plants the original clue. This creates paranoia around camp as everyone realizes that another player already found the advantage, and it makes Jem's future task of acquiring the idol even more difficult as there are multiple eyes on her. At first, it looks like Jem's scheme goes according to plan as she's able to paint a target on Tim. In episode 5, it looks like Tim was en route to getting voted out of the game, but Jem's hyper-aggressive playstyle causes her to go home instead. After acquiring the idol, Jem gets cocky and she attempts to figure out the target of the minority alliance. This causes the partnership of Maria and Charlie to side with the men in eliminating Jem. Maria uses her extra vote in that round, which one is a bad strategic move by Maria, but it also shows the extent of Jem's negative social gameplay. So overall, I think Jem is an interesting player. She is someone that is willing to take strategic risks within the game, which I do appreciate, but it is her over-willingness to take big swings that land her here at number 15. At number 14, we have a contestant that does not attend a tribal council for the entirety of this season, and that's Randen. I considered excluding Randen entirely from this list. Back in my 44 power rankings, I did not include Bruce as he was medically evacuated from the show, but I feel like Randen was around long enough for us to have at least a general sense of his player quality. So in the pre-merge, Randen was originally positioned on the bottom of the Nami tribe alongside Venus. When Randen finds the Beware advantage, he correctly recognizes his position on the bottom and elects to share that information with Venus, who does not leak it to the rest of the tribe. This indicates that Venus genuinely trusted him, which paints Randen as a player that can overcome those initial social hurdles. Randen gets medically evacuated in episode 3, but I don't think he was in a position where he would have went home if Nami attended a tribal council. At that point in the season, Soda and Venus were the primary names circling the Nami camp. I considered ranking Randen higher on this list, but it just didn't feel right given the length of his time on the show. So we will lock in Randen at number 14. Maybe we will see him again in the future if production ever runs a season where they incorporate medically evacuated players. Now on to the number 13 spot, we have the high jumper of the season. It's Moriah. Moriah never really establishes those baseline alliances that enable her to make a deep run. In the first SIGA Tribal Council, she is left out of the consensus plan to eliminate Jem. When Moriah enters the Mergatory, she has an opportunity to flip against those SIGA members that just stabbed her in the back. Mariah's loyalty ends up being her downfall, and she lies to the other contestants, saying that the Jem vote was unanimous. Clearly, Moriah was unaware of her lower position amidst the SIGA tribe, otherwise she would have looked to flip against them earlier at the Mergatory. I will cut Moriah some slack for her actual elimination. She goes home at Final 13 primarily due to the perceived closeness of that SIGA alliance. Not to mention, at Tribal Council, Moriah is able to identify herself as the target, she leaks the information on the Jem vote, and she plays her shot in the dark. So while Mariah's awareness in the game was suboptimal, she eventually came to that realization that she was on the bottom. Plus, she was able to survive a tribal council, which is something that 3 of the contestants below her could not accomplish. Jump into the number 12 spot, we have the mayor of Ponderosa, it's Soda. I had a difficult time evaluating Soda's game because there's a drastic shift in the pre-merge without a lot of reasoning behind it. In the early days of the Nami tribe, Soda is a part of the majority alliance alongside Tevin and Hunter. After winning a couple immunities, that alliance becomes impatient, and Tevin is determined to knock out Soda at the earliest opportunity. Based on the edit, I think there is a legitimate chance that Soda goes home in the event that Nami attended a pre-merge tribal council. Soda rebounds at the Mergatory, where the Nami members offer up Venus's name as a potential elimination. Then, at the final 11, Soda is swapped into a group with majority Nami players. In an ideal world, the Nami contestants would stick together to eliminate Charlie, as he was the only vulnerable Sega member. Instead, Tevin gathers the numbers to vote out Soda, which was completely against his best interest. Soda appeared completely loyal to Tevin. The fact that Soda's quote-unquote closest allies never trusted her is a major knock against her resume. In addition, Soda seemed oblivious to the fact that her allies were scheming against her. There's definitely an argument for placing Soda one spot lower behind Moriah, as both of those players went home in their second tribal council, but I feel that there were fewer tangible mistakes in Soda's run. Here at number 11, we have a player that I'm ranking considerably lower than her original placement. Some people might have some pushback on this pick, but at the number 11 spot, I have Soda's rival, Venus. I understand that Venus placed 7th, I understand that she is a fan favorite on this cast, but I don't think she played a great strategic game. Outside of Randen in the pre-merge, Venus fails to ever establish a legitimate alliance on the island. On the original Nami tribe, she enters arguments with players like Hunter, Soda, and Tevin. While I believe that Soda is the most likely boot had Nami attended a pre-merge tribal council, Venus is probably next up. We see Venus's low position in the game at the Mergatory, where her Nami members offer up her name as a potential boot. In the end, Venus survives the final 13, but that's not due to the actions of Venus herself. Moriah instead goes home that round due to the perceived tightness of the Sega alliance. Between the final 11 and the final 9, Venus goes on her revenge tour. She knocks out those Nami contestants that never trusted her, and Soda, then Tevin, then Hunter. The Soda elimination is a particularly bad look for Venus, as she genuinely believes that she was the orchestrator of that move. In reality, Tevin is the contestant that leads the charge, and Venus was the backup mode. Now, on paper, that 3-round run between the final 11 and the final 9 is solid, as Venus cuts those contestants that don't want to work with her. My issue with her play there is that she never fully integrates within a new alliance. The Yano and Sega contestants perceive Venus more as a number than a genuine ally. This perception comes to fruition at the final 8, where Venus is unnecessarily excluded from the plan to eliminate Tiffany. That round is especially bad for Venus when you consider the fact that the majority alliance elected to rope in Liz over her. The other potential target for that vote was Q, who Liz had feuded with the entire episode. At the end of the day, though, Venus's reputation as a snake amidst the tribe was so prominent that the other contestants would rather attempt to pull Liz into their scheme over Venus herself. Venus goes home at the final 7, and I believe that she deserves the most responsibility for her own elimination. In that round, she finds an idol and hints at her possession of the idol to Charlie. This causes Charlie to lose trust in Venus and vote her out that night. After the show, Venus openly admits that this decision was the primary reason for Charlie flipping. Rounding out all of Venus's strategic blunders is her social game. Venus fails to garner respect from the other contestants on the island. While she goes home at the final 7, I don't think that there was a winning final tribal council combination for her. Yet even Venus's low winning stock was overshadowed by her perceived scheminess. So I apologize to the Venus fans out there. I understand this ranking is probably lower than what many of you expected, but there is still hope for Venus. I think there's a chance she gets invited back for Survivor 50. In that case, she will have an opportunity to remediate her mistakes here. Here at the number 10 spot, we have one of my favorite characters on the cast. This contestant actually placed 10th on the season. It's Tevin. Tevin's pre-merge game is dominant. Through his alliance with Hunter and Liz, Tevin gains control of the Nami tribe. Now, the edit presents Tevin as the central strategic figure of that group, such that had Nami attended a pre-merge tribal council, Tevin would have held the most agency in selecting their target. While I respect Tevin's control in the early game, I think he utilizes his power incorrectly. Tevin is unable to identify the alliance dynamics within the game, which is really showcased by his decision to target Soda. Over the course of the pre-merge, Tevin's feelings on Soda shift. He worries about her strong social game, and he elects to flip his alliance against her. If Nami attended a pre-merge tribal council, Tevin likely votes out Soda. Instead, he knocks her out in the split tribal council at the final 11. This is a horrible strategic read. Soda's in-game confessionals and post-game interviews revealed that she was completely loyal to Tevin. In fact, you can make the argument that Soda was the worst possible target for Tevin in that split tribal council. He would have benefited much more from eliminating a SIGA member in Charlie or an unloyal Nami contestant in Liz or Venus. Liz actually gathers the numbers against Tevin in the following round in order to earn a stamp on her resume. So balancing Tevin's agency with his poor strategic reads places him here at number 10. Then we have the highest placing pre-merge elimination on this list. It's Tim. Out of every contestant on this cast, you can easily make the argument that Tim was most screwed over by circumstances completely outside his own control. He had established alliances in the pre-merge, and an unfortunate tribe swap causes him to go out at the final 12. In the early game, Tim proves that he can navigate into a majority alliance. In the first SIGA Tribal Council, Tim and Ben are able to pull Moriah and Charlie onto their side. It is important to note, though, that Tim was a backseat passenger of that move. The edit presents Charlie and Ben as the primary relationship that brought those two pairs together. Within the scope of SIGA, Tim plays well, but when you expand the game to the other tribes, that's where he starts to struggle. The common theme for Tim's missteps on this season was his unwillingness to give up information. When Tim attends the Journey and the cross-tribal alliance forms, he claims that Moriah was his number one ally, which was simply not true. This later bites Tim in the butt at the merge when Q finds out that he was lying. Then at the mergatory, Tim refuses to throw one of the SIGA members under the bus, which presents the SIGA tribe as this tight-knit group. As a result, Moriah gets voted out. With those knocks against him, Tim still enters the final 12 with his number one ally in Ben and a very dysfunctional Nami tribe. The split tribal council puts Tim in a difficult position where he needs to either flip against his number one ally Ben or flip against Hunter, who is a part of that cross-tribal 6. Tim's refusal to flip against Ben causes the Yanu contestants in that group to band together against him. Keep in mind that at that point in the season, there were multiple Nami members potentially on the chopping block, namely Soda and Venus. If either one of them lands in Tim's group, he likely survives that round. So while Tim's game is not perfect by any means, there were multiple outside factors that led to his elimination. For that reason, I have him as the best pre-merge elimination on Survivor 46. On to the number 8 spot, we have the prototypical challenge beast of the season. It's Hunter. Hunter's run on Survivor 46 will largely be remembered for his successes in the challenges, but I believe that his high points, both socially and strategically, were enough to rank him higher than his actual placement. In the early game, Hunter is a part of the original Nami power structure alongside Tevin and Liz. Tevin ran the early Nami tribe with Hunter and Soda as his closest allies, but over the course of the pre-merge, Hunter builds his relationship with Tevin to the point where Tevin appears eager to flip on Soda at the merge. Hunter's best round of the season, and a major reason why I have him ranked this high, is the final 12. In that split tribal council, Hunter is moved into a group with 3 Yanu members, 2 SIGA, and himself as the lone Nami. Keep in mind that the distribution of the opposite tribal council worked out such that many would assume that a SIGA contestant would go home there. This incentivizes the elimination of a Nami at Hunter's tribal council, and when you combine that factor with Hunter's physical prowess, he is presented as the optimal vote. Just another prototypical meat shield en route to elimination in the early merge. Instead, Hunter convinces the rest of the tribe to eliminate Tim, and he correctly decides to hold on to his idol. Going into the final 10, I felt solid about Hunter's game, but this is where everything falls apart. In that round, he is excluded from the consensus plan to eliminate Tevin. This positions Hunter at the bottom going into the final 9. There, he attempts to gain trust with others through his presentation of the idol, but this idea only magnifies his threat level, and he gets voted out. I know that Hunter is a player that would survive the pre-merge the majority of the time based on his archetype, but there is little evidence to prove that Hunter responds well when things don't go his way in the game, like losing his number 1. At number 7, I have the fashion icon of Survivor 46. It is Q. Q's game is all over the place, and in making this list, my rankings consistently shifted depending on which part of the season I valued more in my evaluation. In the pre-merge, Q operates within the Koreanu alliance alongside Tiffany and Kenzie. I will credit Q for his positioning within that group. Tiffany played the middle of those two sides, but the edit indicates that she valued her alliance with Q just a bit more. In fact, there is speculation that Q and Tiffany would have worked together to eliminate Kenzie in episode 3 if not for the Randen medical evacuation. Another important note from the pre-merge is that Q attempts to form a cross-tribal alliance when he attends a journey, but this force never really amounts to anything within the game. In terms of strategic agency, Q maintains a lot of control in the early game. He leads the eliminations of Jelinsky in episode 1. However, the decision to vote out Tim at final 12 is definitely questionable on Q's part, as Ben was a potential option there as a player with zero real connections to Q, whereas Tim was an original member of the Cross-Tribal 6. The final 10 marks Q's worst point in the season. In that one round, he attempts to flip the vote on his number 1 ally in Tiffany, which was just a poor strategic read for that point of the season. In addition, he leaks the information on the Tevin vote, he leaks the information on Tiffany's possession of the idol, and he pseudo-quits the game at Tribal Council. All of these factors serve to isolate Q at the final 9, where he is on the bottom alongside Hunter. He then operates as a bottom feeder following the consensus plan between the final 9 and the final 8. We also need to acknowledge Q's decision to not bring Liz on reward at the final 8, which drives a wedge between the two of them. From that point forward, Liz is dead set on voting out Q. Q then rebounds at the final 7, where he establishes a new primary alliance with Moriah. On one hand, it's great that Q is able to find a new partner within the game, but he selects the contestant with arguably the highest threat level on the beach. When Moriah wins immunity at the final 7 and the final 6, the target shifts to Q due to his relationship with her. Q goes home at the final 6 with an idol in his pocket, and I will stand on this take that Q's idol misplay is the worst of this entire season. In that round, Moriah learns that Charlie is attempting to gather the numbers against Q, and she shares this intel with him. There are just 2 rounds remaining in the game, so playing the idol here should have been obvious, but Q wanted to take that risk. Overall, the best way to describe Q's game is chaotic. He holds a lot of control in the pre-merge, but his early merge as well as his selections of allies drop him in this list. At number 6, we have the loser of the Forced Fire-Making Challenge. It's Liz. At the surface, Liz was a floater on this season. She was consistently a part of the consensus plan at Tribal Council, but I don't believe that she had a lot of agency in the game, and I don't know if her game was well respected by the jury. Liz goes out at Final 4 claiming that she would have won in the end, but I highly doubt that. I don't know if Liz gets more than 1 jury vote in a final Tribal Council. In the early game, Liz is a part of the majority Nami alliance alongside Hunter and Tevin. That group collectively agrees to knock out Soda at the earliest opportunity. At the final 11 split Tribal Council, Tevin gathers the numbers against Soda. Liz is included on this plan, but she becomes upset with Tevin afterwards because he takes all the credit. Keep in mind, this is the early merge. This is not the point of the season where you should be as focused on building your resume. From Liz's perspective, pushing the credit onto Tevin might actually be good for her game. Going into the final 10, Liz was in a solid spot due to her connections with those Nami players. Granted, she was left out of the cross-tribal 6-person alliance, but there were other faces on that beach that wanted to work with Liz. Her move to flip on Tevin at the final 10 is undoubtedly her worst strategic read of the entire season. Liz leads the charge there, and while it is a stamp on her resume, it leaves her with fewer options going into the final 9. From there, she's excluded from the consensus plan to eliminate Hunter, which leaves her at the final 8 scrambling to find new allies. In that round, Liz blows up on Q for not taking her on reward. In her speech, Liz accuses Q of blowing up her game, which essentially involves openly admitting to the rest of the tribe that her gameplay at that point in the season was poor. Liz rebounds to a degree at the final 8, where despite her comments on Q, the other players pull Liz into their plan to knock out Tiffany over Q. The final 7 is another low point for Liz. In that round, we see this new faction of 3, including Liz, Kenzie, and Venus, that are attempting to pull Charlie onto their side to eliminate Q. Liz fails once again there as Venus goes home. Then at the final 6, Liz establishes herself in a new majority alliance with Ben, Charlie, and Kenzie. That group of 4 runs the game for the next 2 rounds, but Liz's reputation amidst that group is not great. At that point in the season, Liz had mismanaged her threat level such that Ben or Kenzie would have put her into fire-making. She pairs that poor threat level management with poor jury management. I don't think Liz wins the game if she makes it to the end, despite her comments in the finale. Overall, Liz's run on Survivor 46 definitely has its highs and lows. She finds a path to the end game, but that ultimately leads her to go home in 4th place without a realistic shot at winning the season. Then at the number 5 spot, I have the first finalist to appear on this list. It's Ben. I feel that many people will downplay Ben's achievements on this season due to his status as a zero-vote finalist, but when you compare Ben to the other zero-vote finalists of the new era, I think he's one of the best from a gameplay perspective. Starting on the Siga tribe, Ben locks down a number 1 ally in Tim. Maria and Charlie are the pair at the center of that tribe. And when Siga attends its first tribal council, they elect to side with Tim and Ben over the opposing duo of Moriah and Jem. While multiple factors play a role in that decision, one contributing element was Charlie's relationship with Ben. This is a clear example of Ben's social bonds preserving him in the game, and we see this again at the Final 12 Split Tribal Council. There, Ben is a part of a 6-person group which features 3 Yanu members who will ultimately decide who goes home. Ben loses his number 1 ally in Tim in that round, which is definitely a knock against his resume, but I also find it impressive that Ben survives that tribal council when he was surrounded by members of that cross-tribal alliance. That group elected to turn on each other, and Ben's relationship with Kenzie was a factor in that decision. Following the split tribal council, Ben reconnects with Charlie and functions within the majority alliance for the rest of the season. He operates in the majority in the early merge eliminations between the final 10 and the final 8. We then reach the final 7 vote, which definitely damages Ben's reputation in the eyes of the jury. In that round, Ben was aware of the consensus plan to eliminate Venus, but he inexplicably changes his vote to Kenzie at the last second. Ben later admits that this vote was an accident, and Kenzie calls him out for this blunder in the following tribal council. Ben's group of himself, Charlie, Liz, and Kenzie reach the end of the game together. Ben is in a spot where he likely makes it to the final tribal council, regardless of who wins the final immunity challenge. Charlie is the only player there that would have taken Liz to the end over Ben. The issue here is that Ben has very little winning stock by this point of the season. I don't think there was a winning final tribal council combination for Ben. When you look at Ben's game at large, he was positioned within the dominant power structure for the entire post-merge. You can combine that with an ability to escape multiple tribal councils like that split tribal where he was presented as the optimal target. Put those pieces together and we will have Ben ranked at the number 5 spot. At number 4, I have a contestant that I wanted to see more of in Survivor 46's edit. It's Tiffany. I have Tiffany ranked higher than her actual placement. The reason for that is she demonstrates a level of social ability and strategic acumen seen by few other contestants on this cast. Straight up, Tiffany might have the best pre-merge game on Survivor 46. On the Yanu tribe, she navigates into the majority alliance alongside Q and Kenzie, where she plays the middle between those two sides. Tiffany's true strong positioning is revealed when Q attends a journey and claims that Tiffany was his number 1 ally. In the premiere, Tiffany finds Beware advantage as well as the corresponding idol. While Tiffany is not a pivotal strategic figure in the eliminations of Jelinsky, Jess, and Bhanu, she is the thread that holds that Yanu group together. Now, Tiffany's post-merge is not as dominant. She willingly sacrifices some control at the final 12 with the Tim elimination. By voting out Tim and thereby preserving Ben, Tiffany keeps Kenzie's options open long-term, which I think plays a factor in Kenzie later targeting Tiff. In addition, the Tim vote marks the official end of the Cross-Tribal 6, which limits Tiffany's routes afterwards. Tiffany's game picks up a bit at the final 10, where she demonstrates some social awareness as her idol becomes public knowledge and she resists the urge to play it. The final 9 vote is Tiffany's best move of the entire season. In that round, she builds a relationship with Hunter that was strong enough to deceive Hunter into not playing his idol. Hunter later credits Tiffany for his elimination in his exit interview. Not to mention, Tiffany resisted playing her own idol in that round. Tiffany goes home at the final 8, where Moriah earns a major stamp on her resume. A lot of people will fault Tiffany for not playing her idol there, but a bigger drawback in my mind was the fact that so many of her allies were willing to flip against her. At that point in the season, Moriah wanted Tiffany out. Kenzie wanted Tiffany out. Q wanted Tiffany out. I don't believe that she had many genuine relationships remaining in the game. Even if she survives that round through an idol play, I think her route to the final tribal council was incredibly narrow. We are then left with who I believe are the consensus top 3 players of this season in Moriah, Charlie, and Kenzie. To me, there was a clear number 1 player on this cast, which made these 2 and 3 slots a bit more difficult. After some thought, I decided that the number 3 spot would go to the penultimate juror of the season, Moriah. Moriah has an elite early merge, but some mistakes in the late game, especially in the realm of social bonds and threat level management, caused her to fall to number 3. On the original Siga tribe, Moriah positions herself and Charlie in the middle of 2 competing pairs. Moriah clearly states in confessional that she would rather align with the duo of Jem and Moriah, but at the first Siga tribal council, Moriah ultimately agrees to the wishes of Charlie. She votes out Jem, utilizing her extra vote in the process. Moriah is well insulated in these early rounds, but she allows Charlie to keep many of his pawns in the game, like Ben, while she sacrifices her own. She then contributes to the Moriah vote at the Mergatory, thereby further increasing her personal dependence on Charlie. At the Split Tribal Council, Moriah gets unlucky in that Tim gets voted out of the opposite group. At that point of the season, Tim appeared fairly loyal to Moriah, even though she did not reciprocate those feelings. In her own Split Tribal Council, Moriah develops a bond with Tevin as they work together to eliminate Soda, but she flips on Tevin in the following round. The final 9 and final 8 are major positives for Moriah. She holds a substantial amount of agency in directing the final 9 vote onto Hunter, then her move to knock out Tiffany at the final 8, while excluding Kenzie from this plan, is arguably the best strategic move of the entire season. It was a clear stamp on Moriah's resume that she would have pointed to in a final tribal council. The downside of this maneuver was Moriah's determination to receive all the credit. From the final 7 onwards, Moriah is presented as the biggest threat in the game. If she loses immunity at final 7, she potentially goes home, but if she loses immunity at final 6, there is no doubt in my mind that Moriah gets voted out. At the final 7, Moriah's alliance is able to keep Charlie loyal in the elimination of Venus, but I get the sense that this decision by Charlie was more in response to Venus's potential possession of an idol rather than his bond with Moriah. So while things technically work out in Moriah's favor for that round, I don't credit her too much for that vote. The final 6 marks the point in the season where Moriah's entire game falls apart. All season, Charlie had put the pieces in place to flip on Moriah at the optimal time. When Moriah elects to flip on Charlie in this round, the other players are unwilling to side with her. There's multiple things to criticize here. You can criticize Moriah's strategic read to go after Charlie to begin with, as she was in a spot where she just needed loyal allies rather than resume-building moves. Moriah already had the necessary resume to win a jury vote in the end. Another criticism of this final 6 vote is the fact that Moriah learns that the other players are targeting Q, yet she does not encourage Q to play his idol. Q goes home at final 6, which leaves Moriah at the final 5 with the biggest possible target on her back. Her threat level is so high that Liz and Kenzie work together in the immunity challenge just to defeat her. Moriah gets voted out in 5th place, so while I am impressed by her strategic moves in the early merge, I think Charlie outclasses her by separating himself early and gathering the necessary numbers. Moriah did not have a clear path to the end outside of simply winning challenges and firemaking. At the same time, though, you need to balance this rocky endgame with her win equity, as Moriah likely defeats any remaining player in a final tribal council. With all those factors considered, I have Moriah here at number 3. Moving on to the number 2 spot, we have the winner of the season, Kenzie. This is my 5th player power ranking on Survivor Analytics, and of those 5, I had the winner of the season ranked number 1 overall just twice. Needless to say, I am a firm believer that player placement does not equate to player quality. When I look at Kenzie's game at large, I think it's a lower middle tier win in the history of Survivor. In the context of the new era, it's definitely in the bottom half alongside the likes of Marianne and Gabler. I find Kenzie's win pretty mediocre as she never really carves her path to the end. In fact, many of Kenzie's big moves never actually materialize. On the original Yanu tribe, Kenzie navigates her way into the core alliance with Tiffany and Q. Tiffany operated in the middle of that trio, but it's not clear who she would have aligned with between those two options. We need to acknowledge the fact that Kenzie potentially goes home in episode 3 if not for the Randen medical evacuation. In that round, Q was working to pull Tiffany onto his side to eliminate Kenzie over Bhanu. That tribal council gets called off, but I think it's more likely that Kenzie survives that round. The real issue there is that Yanu loses the following immunity challenge. This means that without the Randen medevac, Kenzie would attend a tribal council where Tiffany would need to decide between either her or Q. The result of that potential tribal is a lot scarier for Kenzie. Later on at the split tribal council, Kenzie executes her best move of the season, where she convinces the Yanu members to vote out Tim, a member of the cross-tribal alliance, over Ben. Kenzie developed a connection with Ben that plays a major role in the latter half of the merge. In the early merge, Kenzie flies under the radar, contributing to the consensus eliminations of Tevin and Hunter. I will credit Kenzie for her work at the final 9, as Hunter claims that he did not play his idol in that round due to his trust in Kenzie. The final 8 is a straight-up disaster for Kenzie's game, as Moriah leads the charge to eliminate Tiffany without including Kenzie herself. Kenzie intended to vote out Tiffany at some point as a way to build her resume, but this move was stripped away from her. Kenzie follows that final 8 with another poor round where she attempts and fails to gather the numbers against Q. She ultimately agrees to Charlie's plan to instead eliminate Venus. Then at the final 7, Kenzie establishes a new 4-person alliance with Charlie, Ben, and Liz, but I never felt that Kenzie was a head strategic figure of that group. At the final 6 and the final 5, she is in the majority for the votes against Q and Moriah. I will note that Kenzie and Liz held a substantial amount of agency at the final 6, as they had the opportunity to instead side with Q and Moriah to eliminate Charlie. Then we reach the final 4, where Ben, the player who Kenzie nurtured a relationship with all season, sends her into firemaking. While Kenzie explicitly asked for the opportunity to defeat Liz in fire, I believe that Ben's selection was really a reflection of his alliances. Ben was an emotional player, so I perceived his choice as evidence that he valued his connection with Charlie more than his relationship with Kenzie. This move goes against Kenzie's entire reputation as this incredible social player. She wins that firemaking challenge, and at the final tribal council, Kenzie narrowly squeaks out the win over Charlie. I need to admit that I think Kenzie benefits from some unconventional approaches from the jury members. Some players were influenced by the firemaking challenge, which Kenzie won due to her weaker relationship with Ben. In addition, Q openly admits that he voted based on factors outside the game, while Moriah clearly holds some bitterness towards Charlie. These votes end up deciding the season. We now know that if the jury vote ended in a tie, Ben would have casted the winning vote for Charlie. Overall, Kenzie's win is a social victory. While I respect her ability to form close connections with players like Tiffany, who later campaigned for her on the jury, I do not consider this game a dominant win by any means. It places her here at number 2. We've reached the number 1 spot, and I didn't think that this selection was particularly close. Here at number 1, I have the second place finisher of Survivor 46, Charlie. Charlie plays, in my opinion, one of the best finalist games ever seen on Survivor. I think that his general philosophy of keeping doors open and positioning clear threats in front of him is perfect for the new era of Survivor. While contestants emphasize making big moves, we see that achieving those resume stamps often leads to players immediately becoming the biggest threats on the beach. Charlie understands the importance of making smaller moves and throwing jabs over the knockout punch. In reflecting on Charlie's run, I am constantly impressed by his ability to maintain agency without coming forward as a major threat in the game. While Charlie receives this reputation as Maria's sidekick, I found that he actually outplays Maria on multiple occasions while pushing her forward as a shield. So we can hop right in. Starting on the original Siga tribe, Charlie is in the middle alongside Maria between two pairs. He develops a strong connection with Ben, and when he attends the first Siga tribal council, he is able to convince Maria to not only vote out Jem, but use her extra vote in the process. This is a clear example of Charlie protecting his secondary allies in the game while leading Maria to knock out hers. Later on, at the Split Tribal Council, Charlie is positioned in a group of 4 Nami players, himself and Maria. Maria won individual immunity, so Charlie was the only vulnerable Siga contestant. This was an obvious spot for Charlie to go home, but the Namis elect to flip on each other and instead vote out Soda. Looking back, I think that this particular vote is more a result of Nami's dysfunction, but Charlie still deserves some credit for surviving that round. From the final 10 onwards, Charlie dominates the game by first knocking out some of the Nami opposition in Tevin and Hunter. Then at the final 8, Charlie expertly works in the Tiffany elimination while propping up Maria as this massive threat. The final 7 is Charlie's best round of the season, where he successfully distances himself from Maria in the eyes of the other players. He convinces them that Q is Maria's true number 1 ally. When Maria wins individual immunity, no one considers targeting Charlie based on his history with Maria. The 2 potential targets on the board were Q and Venus. Charlie's bond with Venus in that round leads her to hint at her possession of the immunity idol. Charlie then leads his allies to vote out Venus over Q. The fact that Charlie convinces Liz specifically to knock out Venus in that round is incredibly impressive, as Liz maintained this vendetta against Q. From a long-term strategic perspective, Charlie knew that by eliminating Venus at 7, he left Q and Maria as major threats to push in front of him for the next 2 rounds. At the final 6, Charlie is involved in the Q elimination. This round marks his biggest mistake of the season, where he ropes Maria into the plan. Maria had the opportunity there to convince Q to play his idol, and if that happens, Charlie gets voted out. At the same time, though, I will credit Charlie for his early legwork in developing bonds with the likes of Ben, Liz, and Kenzie. Maria attempts to gather the numbers against Charlie there, but the other players had already sided with him. At the final 5, Charlie votes out his number 1 ally in Maria, as she is clearly the biggest threat in the game. I will note that I think Charlie is largely screwed over by Maria's mini immunity win streak between the final 7 and the final 5. By the time Maria goes home, everyone wanted her gone, so this move was not perceived as a major strategic maneuver for Charlie's resume. I believe that if Maria goes out a bit earlier in the season, Charlie receives more credit. At the final 4, Charlie's social bonds pay off as Ben wins individual immunity and takes Charlie to the end based on their connection. Unfortunately for Charlie, this particular jury cared more about the fire-making challenge. Maria later states that part of the reason why she voted for Kenzie to win was the fire that she saw in her eyes. In a weird way, Charlie is almost penalized for building superior social bonds as compared to Kenzie. We get to the final tribal council, where Charlie barely loses in a 5-3 jury vote. We now know that if this final vote ended in a 4-4 tie, Ben cast the winning vote of the season for Charlie. He was essentially 1 vote away from winning the entire thing. With all of these praises in mind, I still need to knock Charlie for falling one jury vote short. Had he won this season, I would have easily ranked Charlie as one of the 5 best players of the new era. I don't know if I can really put Charlie that high over contestants like Dee, Jesse, Carson, Jam, and Erica due to his win equity. Nonetheless, I still consider Charlie the best player on this season. Thank you so much for listening to this player ranking. I make one of these after every season that we cover here on Survivor Analytics. We are entering the Survivor off-season, but there is still more content to come. This summer, we will be watching Survivor Cook Islands and walking through every single episode on this page, so keep an eye out for those podcasts.